the North Carolina Old Hickory Division, the 30th Army Division, was originally the North Carolina National Guard,
Hmm.
combined with the South Carolina, I think, and Georgia National Guards when they got all called up to military service. And then they became the 30th Division and was called the Old Hickory Division after Andrew Jackson. So
Mhm.
I found this book about the uh, the what the 30th Division did uh, during World War II, and it was history I knew nothing about, but they were a highly decorated, very famous tip of the spear division for the U.S. Army. And this particular book I found was about a battle of called the Battle of Mortain, and I knew that I wanted to include that in the book because it's a tremendously important battle in the history of World War II
Mhm.
that is is really never talked about unless you go search for it.
American Timelines is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network. Find out more at queencitypodcastnetwork.com.
So now I'm obsessed with time. Come on, tell me about the time. Had it all in my hand tonight. Had the time of my life. When the words all come down like blues on Tuesdays come down. Throw it all away.
And now we are joined here at American Timelines by my co-host Artstar and author Roger Newman, MD, novelist, academic maternal fetal medicine specialist, member of the faculty at the Medical University of South Carolina, and also basketball coach. I'm not going to leave that out. Welcome, Roger.
Oh, welcome. Nice. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate talking to you and your listeners.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So, what makes you relevant to what we're talking about on American Timelines right now is that we're in the middle of, well, at the beginning of 1944, but in pretty much in the middle of World War II. I am not, I will say, and my listeners know, I'm not a World War II buff. I didn't ever mean to be covering World War II, except that my wife and I had a true crime podcast where we're talking about true crime through history and pop culture. And we ended up going year by year, and we've arrived at the 40s. And so we try to find some true crime stories, but a lot of it, you can't talk about the 40s without talking about World War II. So we thought, might as well just kind of cover it from our perspective of being in the United States during World War II. It can't help but affect people. So all these stories that people don't hear about is kind of what I like to focus on, like the stories you don't know about the big names and things like this. So with your new book, Boys, about two boys who grew up together, one black and one white, as brothers in the South during the Depression, both enlist in the army or in the services, I should say, going to World War II together and are separated. And so that's why I wanted to have you on. So Roger, thanks for being here and tell me a little bit about. I know it's loosely or closely maybe based on your family, on your father.
That's right. It is the impetus for the story is based on my father's family.
Hmm.
As you mentioned earlier, I'm a OBGYN physician and uh, been doing that for lots of years. And but I've
Hmm.
always wanted to write. And late in my really about a decade ago, I decided to start writing novels. Finally had more time with my practice, and
Hmm.
kids have gone off to college.
Hmm.
So I started writing medical thrillers first because that's what I knew. And then I decided to branch out, and I wanted to try some historical fiction because I've always loved history. And the first one I wrote was loose, based on my wife's family, which was a Civil War uh, drama about a blockade runner based in Charleston.
Okay.
And then I sat back and said, all right, what next? And I wanted to write something about my side of the family. And my father was a World War II veteran. He did grow up on a dairy farm in Leakesville, North Carolina, which is, maybe an hour north of where you are.
Yep.
A
Yeah.
small rural town during the middle of the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm.
And because of and when he was a boy, uh, they discovered a black boy hiding in their dairy barn,
Mm-hmm.
whose family had been killed, and my grandfather, who is the character Papa in the book, kind of an
Mm-hmm.
intimidating character,
Yeah.
he offers the black boy the option of either just, you know, getting off my land, or if you got nowhere to go, you could stay here, but you've got to work.
Mm-hmm.
And with nowhere else to go, the character Alex decides he's going to stay. And to really the family, he's just another dairy worker who happens to live on the property. But to my father, they were the same age, and they became like brothers to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, they went off to World War II together after graduating high school, and enlisted together. But then, because of segregation of the Army, uh, or relative segregation of the Army,
Mm-hmm.
they were separated.
Mm-hmm.
And in my real family story, they never heard from Alex again.
Oh,
They
really?
don't know what became of him.
No.
We've got military records of his induction into the military, but we don't have any records of what became of him. And that was always a kind of a hole in my father's heart.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of World War II veterans, my father didn't talk about the war a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the book is my family story up to the point where they go off to World War II together, and then some there's the truth of what happened to my father during the war, and we can talk about that in a second,
Yeah.
talking about kind of unknown aspects of World War II. But Alex's story is fictionalized at that point.
Fictionalized from there on out. Okay, so
Yeah.
sort of in the book, not to spoil it too much, but at the end they sort of reconnect in the 60s later and have more interaction solving, uh Alex solving a case involving her father. So all that part is fictionalized.
Yes, that's correct.
Gotcha.
That's
But
right.
it's an exciting end to the book. You leave up to, but the inspiration is there nonetheless. And how tragic is that they lost touch with them and never knew what happened to him.
Yeah.
That's
It,
a
it,
So,
it, I think the whole thing was always amazing to me, because just the thought of a white family taking in a black kid in rural Western North Carolina during the Great Depression, and he slept. They built a place for him to sleep on the porch, and
Mhm,
he ate at the table with the rest of the family.
mhm.
That was I think that was probably very unusual for the time. That always struck me as something that would have been. And then the relationship that he developed with my father was, I think, unique. So it was always a story that interests me. Uh,
Especially that town and that part of the country. And then that so the the story of his family being killed by the Klan is true, right? From
as
what
best
your
I
father
as best I know.
from what your
so
father.
I have a question about that.
Mhm.
So, how hard was it for you to?
I'm
I,
I'm
I,
sorry.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, how hard was it for you having to come up with the source material for Alex after just not having you know actual representation of what happened to him? Like, how hard was it for you to write that part of the book?
It was a little bit difficult. I have older brothers and sisters that I spoke with, that they might know more about Alex, and my dad's relationship than I did, and they contributed a few stories that I didn't know. Um, I again, I think a lot of it, while the framework of the story was there, I think a lot of it is made up in my own head.
Mm. Well, I mean, I guess I don't like we're like me and Joe, we're old men, right? You're a little bit older than us. So but so I guess just the fact of like you're growing up around Jim Crow kind of probably made it a little bit easier to pull from some of those themes to add to your story. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, I do believe that's true. And as Joe mentioned, the Alex and Pete, the two brothers, come back together in the late 60s
Right.
and have they reunite when they're both assigned to Fort Jackson. That part was an easy part for me to write because I was a junior high school and high school student during the late 60s and early 70s in
Okay.
Columbia, and my father stayed in the military and he was based at Fort Jackson. So a lot of the latter third of the book, which addressed some of the uh, racial intolerance that existed in the late 60s in Columbia, South Carolina, and in the relationship between the military base and the town. Uh, those were parts that I did live.
Okay.
And I experienced the forced integration of schools when I was in high school, uh, and so I so a lot of that experience makes it in to the latter part of the book,
Okay.
and the early part of the book is just kind of that experience magnified, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, we often Art and I are both from the north, but now live kind of down here in the south. I guess you consider this the South, still Charlotte. And so, my wife and I talk about it all the time on our when we're doing American Timelines, just that it's so important to tell these stories because it's such a threat now of it to go away with people wanting to get rid of, any kind of critical race theory or any kind of, whitewashing of history. So I feel like this at the beginning of this book is really hard to read some of these things that your father experienced and was part of, a white family in the South, and being just right around the KKK running rampant and racism running rampant, and what happened to Alex's family is a sad reality, and it's just heartbreaking. Even just the very beginning of the book is heartbreaking. When they discover
Yeah.
him in the house and what's happened to him, and it's like it's great that we tell these stories. It's hard to tell these stories. It's hard to read these stories, but it's a very important that we still tell these stories. Um and in
Because
some
they happen. They
because they
happen. So yeah.
yeah, because they happen, and it's explains where we are now. But it's I feel like it could give a level of not accessibility, but um general white audiences may be more apt to read something coming from a white family and how they did it or how they lived through it. And just even the school age, like being separated in schools and how they had to go to their brothers at home, but they had to go as much as they can be. I mean, he still wasn't treated uh, obviously like a son by the whole family, but just having to go to separate schools and that whole thing. People don't think about how those schools were different. And there's like so I wonder, did your dad, I know you said your dad didn't talk a lot about the war and things, but did he talk a lot about his childhood and those stories with your family and to your brothers and sisters?
Um, Sadly, he did not. In the book, uh, Pete becomes estranged from Papa,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the same. That was a reality.
Hmm.
My grandfather. There's a story you've probably read about how Pete's mother dies following childbirth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That he blamed his father for forcing another childbirth on his mother. So and there were a lot of they had some he had problems with Papa's religious fundamentalism. So
Hmm.
we only visited my grandfather, I can think of maybe twice during my childhood before he died. And My dad didn't talk about it very much. He talked about, to be honest, he talked about Alex more than he talked about his other brothers,
Really?
with the exception of one brother, Bobby, who was the younger brother who my father was very close to.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. It's the same theme. I've talked with a few another author too about how his dad also served in World War II, and we don't take the time, whether it's intentional or not. People from that greatest generation often didn't want to talk about it, maybe, um, but
Yeah.
but before you know it, they're gone, and you didn't talk to them about it. You didn't, and then you just kind of have to wonder what it's like, or they don't want to. They don't know how to put in words maybe how they felt about it. So just the war in general, what everyone dealt with, that it's got to be, it's just a different world if you think about the traumatic stress that they were under. Um, so
Put in the I don't know if you saw in the intro or the acknowledgement at the book, I
mhm.
mentioned that there's nothing I regret more than all the conversations that I never had with my father.
Right, yeah, I read that, and that's what kind of like sparked that sort of commentary. It's just like, and we all are guilty of that, of our parents and our grandparents, whether or not they've been in World War II or not. But it's like if you just take the time and talk with them. I think the only time my family ever did with my grandfather, I remember we had to in school we had to interview somebody who was above a certain age, and he never spoke about his time either. He was too young for World War II, but too old for Vietnam. He just kind of fell in that. But he served and was in Georgia, and but never had the. But so just hearing about those times is fascinating to me. Um, but some of the yeah, so you kind of were inspired to write this story when you did some um, uncovering of doing your family tree. Is that what kind of after you wrote
Yeah,
about Joy's family?
thinking about my father's family,
Hmm.
and I had also read a book about my father's. Again, my father never talked at all about their different battles they fought in or things that happened. He was a medic,
Hmm.
uh, and he didn't talk about that. But I found a book that's about the North Carolina Old Hickory Division. The 30th Army Division was originally the North Carolina National Guard, combined with the South Carolina, I think, and Georgia National Guards when they got all called up to military service. And then they became the 30th Division and was called the Old Hickory Division after Andrew Jackson. So
Hmm.
I found this book about the uh, the what the 30th Division did uh, during World War II, and it was history I knew nothing about, but they were a highly decorated, very famous tip of the spear division for the U.S. Army. And this particular book I found was about a battle of called the Battle of Mortain, and I knew that I wanted to include that in the book because it's a tremendously important battle in the history of World War II
Hmm.
that is is really never talked about unless you go search for it.
And I think that is one of the things that I'm discovering about going through when I'm going month by month through the 40s is that if you just look at Wikipedia month by month, March 1943, April 1940, the sheer amount of just things about World War II that you couldn't even begin to cover all of it, with all of
Yeah.
the ships that were sunk and the attacks and the torpedoes and there are so many battles. We hear about the Battle of the Bulge and some of these, but like you said, that's interesting to me that you found one specifically to your family that you wanted to include. And going back to one thing about you said about your grandfather, who you'd only met a couple times, and how the way he treated uh your grandmother, and just that it was just forcing her to have children. It was very interesting to think about how to him the family was just workers. Like you just have to keep having children, have more dairy workers when he finds the boy in his in his shed,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, he sees another employee. Like it was so
That's 10 more
weird how,
cows.
yeah, it's just how they thought back then, the Great Depression, and just like some of that backstory you give with the Great
Like
Depression. Yeah.
another powerful thing in the
Mhm.
very early on going in the book is when they I guess they found out about the black boy and they burned crosses on his yard
Yeah.
and he just left him there and then decided that he wasn't going to show with any dairy or whatever and they
Hmm.
came and cleaned it up because they needed him for this dairy. I'm
Yeah.
like, this guy's powerful.
Yeah,
Like
they needed the
all
milk.
all
Yeah.
powerful dairy.
Yep.
Man.
Everybody needs milk.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
wondered if is that a true story from what you heard, that where he stopped serving milk to everyone until they came and cleaned that up?
Uh, That was uh, that's fictional. Made
No.
that part up, but I know the truth of it was that there was some community backlash against him having a black boy living with his in the family
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
as part of the family because he had several daughters, and that there was a community backlash about that, but he wasn't the grandfather papa wasn't having any part of that. He didn't care.
Right. Well, and that's maybe fictionalized, but like Art said, that's a powerful moment in the book.
Yeah,
And that's the thing about, I guess, what do you call it? True fic, or what do you call it? Fiction based on truth, true events. Um, yeah, you have to kind of piece together the parts to tell a good story. But that was a part that as I was skimming through, I had to keep going at that point because you're gripped to what happened, and that there's just so much of this. And that's one thing. Our next episode of American Timelines, we're talking about. We just talked about a lynching, and we're talking about another lynching because that's part of this history and part of what's happening all the time. And it's awful and tragic. But like I said, we've got to talk about these things. And the book it's a very interesting story that you don't hear about. I don't know that I've ever heard a story like this one. So I think I'm glad you wrote it, and I can't wait to get through all of it. And I hope the listeners give it a chance. Um, but I
so
also
too. I
want,
appreciate the kind words.
yeah, yeah. And I see some of the other books you wrote. So you started writing about, so you are an OBGYN,
Right.
and you're an instructor. So you also practice, you actively deliver children?
Yeah. Uh, it's a practice at the university, but
Mhm.
we delivered lots of babies in my time.
So like
So,
I'm reading your bio. Well, I
yeah,
read your bio,
yeah.
and I'm like, where did you find the time to do all of this?
Yes. How do you possibly have enough time to write and coach two? Are you still coaching two teams?
No, just well, it took me 30 years to find the time because literally the very first story, my first book, is about something that happened that an experience that happened to me in medicine in 1984.
Mm,
Oh, okay.
And I always knew in my head it'd be a great story, but I didn't get around to being able to write it till 2010. Um, and that was because as I've gotten to the end of my career, I've transitioned. I don't take night call anymore. I
mm,
don't cover labor and delivery anymore. I do mostly teaching and research at this point. A few procedures, but I'm only working about 40% of the time. So
gotcha.
that's opened my schedule up, and and I filled it up mainly with getting to what I always had wanted to do, which was to write. I've always loved basketball. There's basketball that you'll come across in this story too as you get close to the end. There's basketball almost in all my books, I guess.
Mm,
Uh, but I played for as long as I could, and then for about the last 10 or 15 years, I've been coaching first of all at the school where my daughter went and she
Hmm.
played, and then over the last couple of years, the guy I coach with, he retired from the public school system and took a job coaching at a private school on James Island or Johns Island, and I've coached with him for the last 2 years at uh, Charleston Collegiate School.
And that's the Sun Devils.
Those are the Sun Devils.
But you also coach the Raptors. I'm a big mascot guy, so I like to know.
The academic magnet high school Raptors was the public magnet school where my
Gotcha.
daughter went, and
Okay.
I coached there for about 10 or 12 years.
And what do you know what your overall record was there off the top of your head?
At the I don't know what our overall record was, but we made the playoffs every year.
Wow. Okay.
Now we never there's another school in our region that's we can't beat. We couldn't beat. But we made the playoffs every year, and being that it was the academic magnet school,
Mhm.
that you had to have certain academic abilities to get in there, and it's ranked in the top 10 schools in the United States
Wow.
academically. We always took that as a badge of honor that we could always field a competitive team,
You could win with the smart kids, right? Yeah. So
win even with smart kids.
and then you're also a Seton Hall Pirate,
Yep.
right? So
Very,
did you play basketball there by any chance?
I did not. I
Okay.
did not.
So you played as long as you could, so through high school?
Yeah, I was pretty good in high school, but I wasn't good enough to play in college.
Not that good. Okay. I just thought maybe we had a college March Madness athlete on our hand. So do you root for Seton Hall when you watch March Madness then? You have to?
Well, I watched them lose a heartbreaker yesterday on TV. Um, and but they're not having a very good year.
Mm.
They they've got a good coach and they're going to be good again, but this has not been a good year for them.
Well, I get all the tidbits I can. I never start watching anything till the tournament, so I'm terrible at that. But okay, so back to your books again. So was the first book you wrote When You're Expecting Twins,
Oh,
Triplets,
by
or
the way,
Quads? Yeah,
I can tell you that
yeah.
you'll like this. You'll get to a character when in the latter part of the book, the general at Fort Jackson in chart, the general
Hmm.
commanding general at Fort Jackson is General Eugene Bud Walpole. Uh, that was the character name,
Yeah.
but Bud Walpole is the guy I coach with.
Oh, okay.
Uh, and Bud Walpole, the guy I coach with, is the single mildest, he's the most mannered, proper, far better person than I am. He's the finest person I know. And I took everything about him and changed it 180 degrees for the character Bud Walpole, who is loud and profane and uh, aggressive. I just, to me, no one else would appreciate that because you don't know the other guy.
How
But
did
to
how
me,
did
that's
how did he take it?
I had to ask him his permission, but he said sure. He was happy.
Okay.
Anyway, I digressed.
Um, so I was going to ask you about your book, When You're Expecting Twins, Triplets, or Quads, because you focused on twins and triplets, right? And having multiples, and you were sort of an expert in that field.
Yeah, during my career, that's
Hmm.
kind of what I gravitated to. I ran a multiple gestation clinic at the Medical University for about 30 years
Hmm.
and written a lot of papers about different aspects of caring for women with multiples.
Hmm.
And several years ago, uh, I was had the opportunity to collaborate with two other people I know to write this book, and it's not a medical text. It's a book for women who are expecting,
Gotcha.
and it
Right.
kind of I guess I hate the word self help, but it's written for patients to use as a guide to help
Hmm.
get them through a complicated pregnancy, and I'm really it's a bestseller. It's won awards and
Oh,
I'm proud of that book a lot.
yeah. So I have two children, and I know when we had our first, my wife had the What to Expect When You're Expecting, which that's a huge one that everyone reads, and we read that book from cover to cover, and we're panicked about the whole thing the first time was just, oh my God, what are we even get into it? I can't imagine if knew you were having twins. So I'm sure it's a bestseller. I can really imagine anybody who's about to go through that would want that book. And that's bless you for writing that.
When I
Um,
go to book signings and things, somebody always, invariably, some woman will come up and say, "Oh, I want to read this because I was pregnant with twins and I read your twin book," and that's always really gratifying.
well, that's nice, and that leads them to read your fiction-based books. Do you have a ballpark on how many children you've delivered?
Um, it's very much of a rough ballpark, but somewhere between 30 and 50,000.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness. Oh my God. That's
A
insane.
nation, a small nation.
Well, there's the ones that I deliver myself, and then
Yeah,
there's, being at the university, we're supervising, when I'm on call covering labor and delivery, we're supervising a whole unit of,
sure.
of residents and students.
Hmm.
So, any one day during kind of the peak of my career involved in labor and delivery, I might, deliver 15 or be involved in the delivery of 15 or 20 or sometimes even more babies.
Sure, yeah. And then if you add the multiples to it, that makes
Yeah.
the number even sky high. Oh
Yeah.
man, that's really interesting. And then so some of the other books I wanted to talk about. So that was first, and then
Occam's razor. When did that come into the play?
yeah, which one? Will o' the Wisp?
Was Will of the Wisp first for Occam's razor?
My first book was Occam's
Oh,
Razor.
oh,
Yeah.
Occam's Razor. Gotcha. Sorry, I'm reading them out of
Yeah,
order.
that's the story. That's what happened to me in the early 80s. And it involves um, again a real event. There was a it was when Reagan was president, and he had started his war on drugs,
Hmm.
and they passed a crime bill that authorized the formation of multidisciplinary task forces to go after drug smugglers. And the very first task force ever created was called Operation Jackpot.
Okay.
And actually, the guy who was in charge of that was a federal, attorney, district attorney, who's now the governor. I'm blanking on his name right now. The governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster.
Yeah,
That's
McMaster. Yeah, yeah.
that's what made him. That's what got him his initial fame. But what they did was there was a huge marijuana smuggling operation going on in Charleston that no one, been going on throughout all the 70s. This is the early 80s. They'd smuggled billions of dollars worth of marijuana into the United States using the shrimp boats. Uh,
Hmm.
they bring the marijuana up from Colombia and offload them onto shrimp boats, and the shrimp boats would sail them into all the little, you know, uh, docks all up and from Hilton Head to Charleston to Allendale, McClellanville, all these little towns, and they'd
Yeah.
unload the marijuana, put them on trucks, and drive them all up and down the East Coast. It was the biggest marijuana smuggling operation in the United States, and literally no one knew about it until the smugglers all went down and bought property on Hilton Head that was being developed at Sea Pines Plantation.
Mhm.
They went down and bought, I think, 10 beachfront properties and paid cash. And some old real estate guy called up the FBI and said, you ought to look into this. These hippies all just came down here and, spent, $30 million to buy beachfront property. So
Yeah,
they did. And they busted all these people in Charleston, all of whom we all knew.
really.
Uh, I mean, they were just all people that we all had everybody knew everybody in Charleston, I guess, in the 70s.
Yeah, small town
Uh,
in the 70s, right?
yeah, but nobody knew what these guys were doing. They were just cool guys who we used to hang out with. And so I knew that was going to make for a good story.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. And then you focus it on somebody who was uh a a patient at the OBGYN facility at South Carolina, M
Yeah,
MUSC.
there's a patient in the hospital at the time that the Operation Jackpot busts go down, who's the girlfriend of one of the honchos of that those books were all basically from the perspective of an OBGYN doctor named
Mhm.
Declan Murphy,
Okay.
who gets himself involved in all kinds of trouble over and over again.
And
I
that's you.
I tell anybody who listens that Declan Murphy is the literature's only OBGYN action hero.
Yeah. Well, so that's I love how that, yeah, you're an OBGYN and you write an action hero story about an OBGYN because they can be action heroes too. Is he also a basketball coach? Because you said you sneak
Oh
basketball.
yeah, there's basketball in that book. That's how he knows one of the kingpins of the drug smugglers is on his. He plays, you know, city league basketball with him.
Okay.
That's one of the links between. It was a
Excellent.
real link at the time, and that's one of the story links.
Okay. So you played basketball with some of these smugglers back then?
Yeah, one of them.
That's awesome.
He happened to be a real good player, and he was he was the coach of our city league team,
Hmm.
and we we thought he was just a cool guy. He bought us all our jerseys, and after games, he took us out to Captain Harry's Blue Marlin Bar and he paid for all the beers. We just thought he was a cool guy.
And
He
he
was an
was
assistant tennis coach out at Kiowa, and we always wondered how he made so much money as an assistant tennis coach. But
And was he
let
smoking the
that go.
stuff too? Was he smoking the weed while he's playing basketball?
I'm sure these guys called themselves the gentlemen smugglers, and they never hurt anybody.
Yeah.
There was never, but they all got rounded up and
Yeah.
sentenced to prison, and some of them spent a lot of time in prison.
Oh, that's a sad thing. Yeah, I mean, it's nowadays looking around, especially with how decriminalized marijuana is and how, like you said, have you ever met a violent marijuana user? I mean, it's like generally they're pretty laid back guys, you
Right.
know. So yeah, we Art and I have an associate that we do another podcast with that he's
Very
basically
mellow. Yeah. Yeah.
very mellow. He's very like pretty
He's
much
like the yeah.
always under the influence, and he's just the most chill guy you can imagine. So
One of the guys I mentioned, Captain Harry Blue Marlin Bar, which was the kind of the place to go in Charleston at the time. But one time after a game, we met one of their friend Roy's friends. Roy was the kingpin,
yeah.
who was Jimmy Buffett. And Jimmy Buffett was, I shouldn't tell tales of the departed, but I mean, there was no question he was involved in this smuggling operation. He would fly his plane.
Yeah.
Most of the marijuana they brought in on shrimp boats, but he flew his plane into the Johns Island airport on a regular basis. And uh, he was very chilled also. There was
Yes.
nothing that Jimmy Buffett ever sang about that wasn't real.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah. Jimmy Buffett. Yeah. That's another one. Those guys, also those parrot heads. I've done a few of those over the years. So Dr. Declan Murphy is in multiple of these books. So I'm looking at Two Drifters. Like it's sort of a series. He's a medical
Kind of
thriller.
follows him along.
Yeah.
It's the Occam's Razor is about his involvement with these drug smugglers. Two Drifters becomes a medical legal drama.
Okay.
And then the third book, What Becomes, involves uh, environmental pollution by a environmental polluter that's having reproductive consequences that Declan Murphy and another researcher, kind of get onto, and there there's an attempt to shut him up,
Uh,
but it doesn't work. Yeah,
are
so different problems, but each of those three involve Declan Murphy
are
as my
these
main character.
are these all three inspired by certain things you've come across or at least thought of while you're in the field, or just some of it completely just imagination?
All inspired by some event.
Hmm.
The medical legal drama is inspired by a real case,
Yep.
and then the third book about the environmental pollution really inspired by the research, environmental research that one of my partners was doing.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But the as you get into the story, the drama, it becomes fictionalized.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, right. For more action.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and so, and then the Will o' the Wisp is the one based on your wife's family tree that she discovered.
yeah, yeah. I met my wife at Seton Hall, and her family had grown up in upstate New York
Okay.
and Connecticut, and they cried when I married her and took her south, and my family cried when they found out I was bringing a Yankee home. And then, but my wife got into ancestry,
Hmm.
not, a decade or so ago, and started doing some research and discovered that her great great grandfather and great great grandmother had been married in the Charleston Cathedral.
Wow.
There was always a family legend that someone in the family had been in shipbuilding and might have lived in the South. And it turns out that there was a family member who lived on Shem Creek, which is right over the Ashley River from Charleston, and had a shipbuilding concern there,
Mhm.
and became a blockade runner during the Civil War. Um,
Wow.
so, I mean, to me, that was just an amazing story, and
Yeah.
we built up that blockade runner story into a story about the lost Confederate gold,
Yeah.
which is a kind of another legendary story about the Civil War.
Yeah. And that's, yeah, it's interesting that her family happened to have ties in the same area you end up sort of settling.
Yeah, it was her family's ties to Charleston go back to like the 1600s. So
Wow.
so she was a native of Charleston long before
Before you brought her back
I ever
down.
was. Yeah,
And hopefully that allowed your family to accept the Yankee a little more when she's originally from the area. But yeah, and that's what I read in your acknowledgments at the end, that your wife, it sounds like you recognize that she is the greatest things ever happened to you. And you love her a
that's
lot and grateful for her
absolutely
help.
so.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful. That's always good to hear. But yeah, well, gosh, these all sound exciting. Art, was there anything else you wanted to bring up or any other questions you had about?
I think he answered most of them. Let's
Yeah,
just in general talking about, I guess early on when I asked about the Jim Crow question,
yeah,
and then finding the time to actually do all of this. Because we consider ourselves to be somewhat of content creators. Like I'm an artist, and it's like for me, it's working a weird 9 to 5, but like working all types of hours, having like that free moment where I can say like, okay, I need to work on something. But that free moment is always like, okay, let me get some rest because I got to be right back at it.
mhm,
And so it's like for us, it's like to see someone who's older than us who's doing it, like it's like a very good thing to see. Like it's one of those things where it's like just listening to you talk, like I can feel the passion. Like just reading the book, I felt like as far as I've gotten, I can feel I feel much more of the passion and your writing, having spoken to you
mhm.
now, like so now, like I literally cannot wait to get back into the book. Like I want to read Occam's Razor now. So it's like it's it's
Well,
a
I would
beautiful
I would encourage you to do so.
it's a
Yes.
beautiful thing.
And
I
with
will
both,
tell you that
go ahead.
when I talk to other authors,
Mhm.
particularly, the big time authors,
Mhm.
they all tell you the same thing, that, oh, you got to commit X number of hours to it every day. You got to have a
Right,
spot. You've got to go
right.
sit there and write
Force yourself.
5,000 words, or do X, whatever it is, but you got to do it. You got to make it a job.
Right.
And I will say that I've never been able to do that,
Mhm.
partially because I don't think it's how I'm wired. I work better in spurts when
Hmm.
I'm inspired to do something, but also because of my career in medicine, I don't have 3 or 4 hours every day to spend on something. So I've had to approach it different than the way most writers say you have to do it, but
Right.
I don't think you have to do it that way.
Yeah, it's similar with podcasting too. I mean, this is a side thing for us. We have full-time jobs and things. So, but you again, you do it when you can, and then you pour your passion to it. But I love how with boys, I love how it's written by both perspectives. You get
Yeah, yeah.
you get one authoring one
Oh,
chapter and another, both
so
brothers.
that brings up another question.
Yeah.
So, what did you have to when you were deciding to write this book? Did you get to a point where you said, like, am I going to write this from a first person perspective or a third person perspective? And why did you choose to write it from first and not in third? Like, do you feel like we get more the fact that we're getting both characters' voices as opposed to just getting one, like, I guess your main voice telling the character's story?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it was an issue. I wanted from the beginning to write it from the perspective of two different. I wanted, basically the two Pete and Alex experienced pretty much the same life, but their perspectives on it or their experiences are tremendously different because of the color of their skin. So I wanted to write it from partially from Pete's perspective and partially from Alex's perspective. And so I knew I wanted to do that. But of course, when I did it the first time, the first draft, um, and in looking back, I have no idea why I thought this was a good idea. But I wrote like the first half of the book was Pete's story, and then the second half of the book was Alex's story. So they didn't play off each other, and people who read it said this doesn't work at all. I go halfway through the book and I either like Pete or I don't like Pete, and then you just drop him and you go to another character, and it's just and someone finally said, well, you ought to just alternate chapters to some degree so that
Mhm.
the reader stays on the same timeline, but you can still get into different perspectives. And that I think ended up working a lot better. But I to answer your question directly, I knew from the beginning I wanted to tell half of the story from Alex's perspective and half of it from Pete's perspective, and find intersections where they would experience the same thing but have different perspectives on it.
Okay, cool, cool, cool.
Yeah, I definitely compared to the other option. This definitely goes a lot better. I don't, it makes you kind of you can follow it this way, for sure.
It's a
So yeah,
bad day though when you write the whole book and then someone says, "Oh, this you needed to do it this way," and you
yeah,
go, "Oh,
I got to
you're
start
right."
all over. Well, at least you had. It sounds like you had it all written, and then you just had to just kind of rearrange everything, which I can't imagine.
Had to,
I
but
can't.
you had to fix it up some.
Yeah, yeah, I can't imagine. And then I'm imagining you had to do quite a bit of research into all of it. All of to write the perspectives of the war and World War II, and that probably took a
Yeah,
while.
a good. I had to. Yes, my medical books. I didn't have to do any research,
Sure.
but the book on blockade runners, I didn't know anything about blockade running. I didn't know anything really about being on the water and sailing. So I had to do a lot of research that with that one. And with this one, I had to do a lot of research on the Battle of Mortain, which is a big central part of the story. And then in the end, I had to do some research on how the military justice system interacts with civilian justice system, and how far can the military go, and how far that can they do they are not allowed to go.
Hmm.
And that's a complex relationship, but that becomes part of the solving the crime part of the story at the end.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna say that would be something I would have. I don't think I was even aware that of the differences until I started reading some of that. So or that was even, how often do you think about investigating crimes within the military? other than A Few Good Men or whatever that is. So, well, Roger, thanks for your time. I appreciate this, and
It was my
yeah,
pleasure, and appreciate the opportunity to talk about boys, and added benefit of getting ready to go back and do a little shout out for some of the earlier books.
yeah, for sure. I always find when I read people's bios, I just get, fascinated by what they've done, and it's hard to pick one thing. Like, let's talk about everything. And of course, your career, um, I'm sure you've made a lot of uh, women happy by bringing so many people into the world and helping them. And I'm sure, uh, I those are moments I think that maybe I don't know if you take for granted, but the people whose lives you've affected by bringing them in. Like, I remember every moment of both of my children being born, and the the OBGYN was a very comforting person both times, and I'll never forget their faces and their comfort, their mannerisms. And so I think just that in general like makes you an endearing figure in person. So
It does.
kudos to you.
I still get Christmas cards from a lot of my moms who had twins or triplets, and those are always bring back really good memories.
Yeah, well, thank you for writing the book, and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your a little bit of insight into the book and World War II history. And this has been great. It's wonderful to meet you. And
All right. Well,
Yeah, it was definitely
thank you
a pleasure.
again, and Arthur, thank you too.
You're welcome.
And good luck.
Oh, my child, it's about to get wild. Have you been down on the streets today? Say, now, baby, it's about to get crazy. Everybody's got something to say. We got 10,000 people screaming, oh my God, it's over, but they're never gonna take us away. So you better get believing there's a brand new feeling. If you're asking, I say stay awake, stay awake.
Matt Truman Ego Trip is the greatest band of all time. Buy their music. Also, American Timelines is a product of History for Jerks and a member of the Queen City Podcast Network.